Everyone would take a seat or stand comfortably, whichever you'd like to do. Oh, whoops.
Did I do that?
Did I do that? What happened? Okay. Okay. I'd like to welcome you to the Pages and Places Book Festival's Young Adult Panel. The title of this panel is Teens and Transformation, Today's Renaissance in Young Adult Literature. I have some little housekeeping notes. We're going to have copies of the panelists' books on sale after the session. And the panelists will be able to sign those books for you if you'd like. The next panel is the Independent Publishers panel at Anthology at 1:30 p.m. Anthology is just across the road. Okay. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm excited. These panelists are great. I've had the opportunity to meet with them last night and this morning, and I'm going to start with an introduction. Immediately to my right is Cecilia Galante. She is the author of 2 young adult novels, Hershey Herself and The Patron Saint of Butterflies, a book since picked for 2008 that has been named Young Adult Book of the Year by the Northeast Independent Booksellers Association, and is a recommended read for teens on Oprah's website. Cecilia has a BA from King's College in Pennsylvania and an MFA in creative writing from Goddard College in Vermont. She is a resident of Kingston, PA. She teaches high school English, writes a book column for the Times Leader newspaper, and tries to think of interesting things to cook for her husband, Paul, and their 3 children. And next to Cecilia is Jenny Hahn. She is the author of teen novels Shug and The Summer I Turned Pretty. She received her BA at UNC Chapel Hill and her MFA in writing for children at the New School in New York City. She works part-time at the Calhoun School Library on the Upper West Side. She is currently working on the sequel to The Summer I Turned Pretty and a new middle grade chapter book called Clara Lee, Dream, Genius, in Training, to be published by Little Brown in 2010. Next to Jenny is Lisa Greenwald. She is the author of the newly released tween novel, My Life in Pink and Green. She also works in the library at the Birch Walton Lenox School Library in the Upper East Side in Manhattan. Lisa is a recent graduate of the New School's MFA program in writing for children. She lives in Brooklyn, New York. Okay, to get started, my name is Anna. I'll be moderating the session. And we're just going to ask some questions and have a real informal conversation with our panelists. Okay, the first question I have for the panelists is, what inspired you to write young adult novels as opposed to other genres?
I'll start. My first book is The Patron Saint of Butterflies, and I didn't set out to write it for young adults. I just set out to write a book, a story. And when I sent it to my agent and she deemed it good enough to send out to publishers, she said, I think we're going to market this as young adult. And I remember being really, really disappointed. I said, what, young adult? I want this to be a book. I don't want this to be a teenager book. And I really wasn't familiar yet with the young adult genre. I really hadn't explored it or read too much in that field. But since then, since it has been marketed as a young adult, which it very wisely was, since it involves 2 14-year-old girls, I've become more acquainted with the young adult field and the whole young adult genre of novels, and it's just the most fascinating and brilliant field of writing. There's some incredible writers, two to my right here, just to name a few. So that sort of encapsulates my experience writing for young adult, which kind of happened by accident.
For me, I guess it's the opposite. I always really loved young adult books. I think I kind of came of age during the first little golden age of young adult books, of like Lois Duncan and Christopher Pike and all this great stuff that was being put out there, but it was all coming out in paperback first, so it's different than now, which is hardcover. It's a bigger market now, but back then it was like sort of cheaper Sweet Valley stuff and Babysitter's Club, and I loved it. I was gobbling it up all the time, and I took a class in college called Writing for Children, and it was like a writing workshop, and we were reading stuff, new stuff and old stuff, and writing stuff, and I started writing my first book, Shug, when I was in that class, and that was senior year of college. And then when I wrote that first chapter, I just knew that was what I wanted to do, that was what I wanted to be involved with. I wasn't sure if it was going to mean me actually writing books, but I knew that I wanted to either be in publishing books for children or being a librarian, anything that would allow me to be near that genre I was hoping to do. So, sort of a dream come true.
Well, I always loved writing, but I wasn't really sure what I really wanted to write, but I sort of thought in the back of my mind that I'd love to be a writer. But my first job out of college was working in children's publishing as an editorial assistant, and I really loved it, but I thought to myself, you know what, I want to be one of the people writing the books. And then it just sort of came together from there. And I went to the new school and the MFA program and all of that, but I felt like it was always this path of like I knew I wanted to write and I loved writing, and I just didn't know what I actually wanted to write, and then came together from that first job in the MFA program, and then it all worked out.
Very good. So are there any young novels in particular that inspired you or that you love that really kind of pushed you to write in the genre?
Well, like I said, I grew up reading a lot of like Sweet Valley and like Babysitter's Club and stuff, but I read something in college that actually was young adult, but it's one of my favorite books. It's called I Capture the Castle. Has anyone read that book? No? By Dodie Smith. And she wrote 101 Dalmatians, but this is about a 17-year-old girl coming of age in England in the early 1900s, but it feels as fresh and as relevant as if it was today. You'd read it and you wouldn't know, it takes place 100 years ago. So that's one of my favorites. And of recent times, I think Hunger Games, I really love that, which is sort of a dystopic book about the future and just like a lot of fighting and violence, but there's also some romance. There's so much good stuff being published right now. I think it's hard to even read it all. I work in a school library, so I buy a lot for the library, and I'm always trying to keep up with what the kids are reading so we can have it available to them. So it's a lot of fantasy, some like spy stuff, Wimpy Kid, graphic novels, stuff like that. And I enjoy all of it.
I think two of the classics that have inspired me to continue writing in this genre have been The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, which I read at 15 and had a life-altering moment as I read the last page. I was in the bathroom in my public high school, sitting against the wall, and just, I remember just putting the book down and kind of staring into space for about 5 minutes and thinking to myself, I can't believe you can write about stuff like this. I can't believe that a kid can be, the story is about a boy that really has a nervous breakdown, right? He's unraveling, and he's funny, and he's brilliant, and he's tortured, and he's, all of these things, neurotic and depressed, and, it was sort of like, oh my God, that's me. I was going through a particularly anguishing teenage year, and it was incredible to see somebody like that in the pages, and I thought to myself, I wonder if I could ever do that. And so that has remained a classic for me, and it still does. It's a book I reread every year because every year I'm different, and so I get something else out of the book. And another classic that I love and that I read really as sort of the at the altar of young adults is To Kill a Mockingbird. I think is just one of the most exquisite novels ever written about kids and, the world at large and all of those huge issues that, kids have to face, the death of a parent, racism, all of it. It's brilliant. So those are my two.
I think what's interesting is both of those now, where they publish today, they might be published as young adult and not, adult fiction, because they both send her around.
Yeah,
the
they
young
weren't,
protagonists.
right, when they
they're
came
not.
out, they weren't labeled young adult.
And it's a sort of newer thing, I think.
Yes.
Well, when I was in 6th grade, I read the book Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt. And even though I've read so many books since then, it just stayed to be my favorite, until today. And I don't think I realized this at the time when I read it, that it influenced me to want to write in this genre. But when I think about it now and how it affected me at the time when I was in 6th grade and I had just moved, it was just amazing to me that I loved this book so much and I connected to it so much. And that I think of myself writing now, and I don't know if my books will ever have that impact on any readers, but just to think that that influenced me that way, and now I'm writing for that age as well, would be one of them. And also, when I was working in publishing, I read the book Elsewhere by Gabrielle Zevin. I was on submission, and I was working at the publisher, and I read it, and I was reading it at work, and then I took it home with me to finish reading that night, and it was just like so phenomenal. And from then on, I sort of just had this different opinion of children's literature and everything. So I would say those two books stand out.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. You all have 3 different takes on that. I'm wondering if you guys could describe the writing process to the audience, how you get from blank page to full novel. If you can encapsulate that in 5 minutes, that would be great. No, it's just a brief overview of your writing process.
Should I start? Well, I sort of have a different process depending on where I am in the writing process, if that makes any sense. But usually I'll start with an outline, and then like a brief outline, and then while I'm working through the draft, I'll write 5 pages every weekday. So that way I feel like I'm getting my work done each day. They may not be the best 5 pages ever. Sometimes they're completely horrible, and I'll know that I have to rewrite them. But when I'm writing the first draft, I just work through the first draft that way, like 5 pages, no matter what. It could take me 40 minutes. It could take me, 6 hours. That's how I do it. And everything that I write, I show to my agent first and get her feedback. And then the revision process is a little different because I'll have to sort of go through the whole book, take it apart piece by piece, change certain sections. Sometimes I'll change one thing in the beginning that will totally affect everything throughout. But my process for writing a first draft is pretty much brief outline, 5 pages a day until I'm done, then go back and then revise.
Lisa and I write completely differently. We met in grad school, so we know each other's process as well. And with me, I usually start out with a character, a situation, not really with a plot, just something in my head, and I start writing it by hand. And I don't write in order, and I don't write every day. I don't write 5 pages at a time. I usually just do what I feel like doing, whatever feels inspiring to me, whatever I really want to write that day. I usually do the fun stuff first, like the scenes that are really exciting to me. I'll do that stuff first, and then when I'm 150 pages into it, I'm like, oh, this is so hard, because then you have to go back in and figure out how everything works and where it goes, and write all that stuff, the sort of tendons of the book. Because I sort of do the big meaty pieces first, and then I go in and I'm figuring out how it fits together. A lot of times I think of it like quilt making, where I'm sort of making these pieces and then sort of sewing the whole story together into one thing that works. So usually by the time I'm finished with a first draft, it's been run through the mill hundreds of times. I'll look at a scene over and over again before I move on to the next thing. And so the first draft is usually pretty close to what it's going to look like in the end, because I've spent so much time working on each piece of it. And then, so I'll be writing by hand, and then I'll type it into my computer at the end of the day, so that way I feel like I've done double the work. So you see all this stuff. I'm like, wow, I did so much today. And then I'll print the whole thing out and start going over it line by line, and I'll keep doing it 5 or 6 times. And then I'll show it to writing friends like Lisa and other people that I met in my program and see what they think. And then I'll show it to my editor last. when I feel like it's finally like something decent?
Well, I'm a type A personality, I'm pretty sure. So I'm pretty stringent when it comes to my writing process. I've always been kind of a disciplined person. I don't know why. I think I was sort of born that way. But I write every day, except for Sundays. And I don't have a set amount that I have to write. I don't have to do 1,000 words. I don't have to do 6 pages. I just write until my time's up. I have 3 children, I have a full-time teaching job, and I have my time is precious, which also makes the time that I have to really utilize it. So I write during the time increment that I have, and then I have to stop. One thing that might be interesting to some of you that are writers is that when I stop for the day, I always make sure that I stop in the middle of a sentence, so that when I come back the next day, I have something to pick right back up on. I don't have to sit there and waste, an hour just stare. I mean, I have done that, obviously, sat there and stared into space and pulled my hair, and when, the words are in a block of cement 10 miles away and you're wondering when they're going to come into your brain. But it helps. That was something I learned from Hemingway, was that he would leave off in the middle of a sentence or in the middle of a paragraph and then have something to come back to the next day. My editing process is pretty basic too. I begin every day by rereading and revising what I have written the day before, so that I'm not looking at it with a fresh eye, and I'm also kind of gaining momentum for the day's work ahead. And then again, I show my work to my agent, and I have one reader friend that I trust implicitly, who reads my work, and I get feedback. And also, it's really cool that I write for the young adult world, because my oldest daughter is 17, and she's a voracious reader. And if I show her something, and she says something like, "Yeah, that does not work, Mom," I know to take it out. I do. I've learned not to be offended. I know that she's telling me the truth. Like, Mom, kids don't talk like that. So it's great to have. It's great. I'm lucky. In-house editing.
Great. That's 3 very different approaches, but with all ending in novels that are wonderful to read. So I'm wondering if we can get a little more specific about how you write these novels. Each one of you wrote at least one of your young adult books in the first person. How do you keep your mind thinking like a young adult during this writing process? Did it come easy to you, or did you have to concentrate deeply to write as if you were a 12-year-old? How did that go for you?
I don't think you have to worry about thinking like a 12-year-old. If the story is about a character that you really love and that is starting to really take over and tell your story, that's the only person you have to worry about listening to. Eventually, the deeper you get into your writing and the deeper you get into your novel, I call it like the writer's runner's high. You reach this point where the character will really take over for you, and you become just sort of like a vessel that he or she is speaking through. This person, if you tap in deeply enough, if you give him or her the time and the devotion and the attention that she demands to tell this story, it's going to end up being told his or her way. You're just going to be the conduit through which the words come. And I think that's the voice that you need to listen to. You don't have to worry about, oh my God, does this sound like a 12-year-old? Maybe when you go back later and edit, you might want to take out, a word that's like newfangled or something, which is, I'm almost 40 years old. That would be a word I would use. It would not be a word that maybe a 12-year-old would use. So you could go back and change a word or something. But as you're writing, and if you're really tapped into this character's voice, you're going to be able to hear that as the process unfolds, at least for me.
And I think part of why that happens is, and that why you're able to sort of take on this character and feel like, you are really like channeling the characters, because in my opinion, like every character you write is like some small piece of you. in some way, in some little way. It's not like if I wrote a character that was, a murderer, there's like, I'm like a murderer, but maybe some small facet of your character is in all your characters in some small way.
Yeah, maybe she wears red ribbon in her hair.
Maybe she wears red ribbon in her hair.
Seriously.
And she uses a ribbon to strangle people.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, I think that's what makes characters feel real, is that they're personal and that they're dear to you in some way. Sometimes my friends will, read my books and they're like, oh my gosh, I know that's me. And, or they'll be mad and they're like, was that me? And it's a character that they think is annoying or selfish or any of those things. And I'm always like, no, it's me. If it's annoying and it's like, has sort of defects, then it's probably me. Like, and that's parts of me that I feel like I can sort of channel into those characters, and that is like the fun part of it, I think. And what makes it feel personal and real.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. I totally agree with what Cecilia and Jenny said, but for me personally, this is kind of an embarrassing thing to admit, but I kind of still feel like I'm 12. Like the movie 13 going on 30, that's kind of my life. So for me, it's very easy to get back into that middle school mindset, and that's my favorite thing to write, is that tween age, like 9 to 14, I guess, 9 to 13, because I sort of still feel that way. But they're right about the characters and everything else too.
So these characters are are people that you get to know intimately, and they become part of your world. Do you ever find yourself just going grocery shopping or something, and all of a sudden a character will pop into your head, and you're like, oh, all right, let me get to know this character? Like, how do characters arise when in the writing process?
I think one of the great gifts about being a writer is that it teaches you to pay attention. And whenever I love going to the grocery store because I love to watch people. I love to watch people. I love to see what's in their cart, but I also like to see how they dress and how they talk to the cash register. And I'm constantly taking like little mental notes, and there have been moments where I'll see something. Like there was a cash register at Price Chopper the other day he was a middle-aged man. He had glitter in his hair, Smurfette earrings, and pink nails, and I was like, I gotta put it in a book. This could be great for a character someday, So you kind of keep like this running tally of personality quirks and things you see and the way that people say things, and I say it's a gift to pay attention because you're really fully present and looking and paying attention to what's going on. You're not just kind of plodding through your day. It's a great, exciting thing, a way to live, I think.
I also think it gives you great excuses to do things maybe you wouldn't ordinarily do, or that you always wanted to do but you've never done it, because it's all sort of grist for the mill. It's all like, towards the end of like, your writing. So if I was going to go to like a dairy farm and like milk a cow or something, I'm like, I could use that at some point. Yeah. Maybe not this book, but somewhere. You know what I mean? Or if I'm sitting in the subway and like a fight breaks out, and I'm like just kind of listening and watching, or one time I saw this police officer and I was looking at his badge and his name was Officer Sipsy, and I just like that name so much. Sipsy sounded like a great name, so I was like, I'm gonna like keep that and use it for a character one day when it fits. So stuff like that, I think it sort of makes the ordinary special.
Extraordinary, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that characters can really come from anywhere. Like the character Lucy in my book, My Life in Pink and Green, came from a girl who was sitting in the row in front of me at my brother's college graduation. I knew nothing about the girl. I didn't talk to her at all or anything. But she was so spunky, and she looked like she was having the time of her life, just sitting there like with some guy who I assumed was her grandfather, but I really don't know. And something about her just stuck with me, and then a character grew from there. And I have no idea who that girl is, and we'll probably never see her again.
Something similar happened to me. I was at the orthodontist office because I was nannying a girl, and I took her there to get her braces tightened, and I was waiting for her in the lobby, and there was these two girls, maybe like 8 and 5, and they were sisters, and they had this long sort of silvery blonde hair, and the older one was like very protective of the younger one, and the younger one was, sort of free-spirited and running around, and the older one was like, sit down and like be quiet. And I wondered, like, who are these girls? Where are their parents? And, about their relationship, and it just seemed so special to me that was something I thought about. I have a sister too, and I'm always writing sister relationships, but it's nice to go out and see a new one and to be inspired by that. So there's a book I'm working on called Promise You Won't Tell. I've been working on it for a while, but those two girls were sort of the inspiration for that.
Wow. That's really cool. So you never know out there. You could be a character in a book just by walking through the produce section. You never know. Okay, you all write realistic young adult novels. With the rise in popularity of fantasy young adult novels, dare I say, the Twilight phenomenon, do you ever see yourself writing a type of fiction other than realistic?
Honestly, the short answer for me would have to be no. I have tried my hand at fantasy, supernatural, and I don't, you know what? I don't enjoy reading it. So then they say that you should write what you enjoy reading, because that's what you will probably be the best at writing, is what the books you like to read. Write a book that you would like to read. And I really appreciate the craft and the art that went into Harry Potter. But I've never been a huge fan of the series. I've never read Twilight. I've never read any of those supernatural stories. I'm just not into that. I'm much, much more interested in how real people deal with real issues. You know, I think it's hard enough to figure out stuff in real life than to have to come up with a entirely other alternate life and figure out how all that works. I mean, it just blows my mind that people can do that and do it well. But I wouldn't be one of them. I'm going to stick with realistic.
And I have to say, I'm not a big fantasy person, but I do like a good story. So I feel like if it's a good story, I'll read it. Harry Potter, and I do like Twilight, and I do like Hunger Games and books like that. Then I'll read it and I'll love it. So it's like, to me, what makes those things work is taking, you know, the real emotions, real problems, and putting them in this fantasy setting, and that's what makes it work, and not making everything like, you know, unrealistic. But, you know, with like the vampire medium and like a show like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which I'm a big fan of that show, but like each episode was almost like allegory of what's going on in high school. So like if the principal was like a demon, then it's kind of like, you know, how real life, if you hate your teachers, or one week everyone's like a hyena and they're like in this crowd and they're like a pack. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like cliques, and, you know, high school is like hell. Okay, well, like high school is like hell, you know? So everything is like taken to that extra level, and that's what makes it cool, because it's still grounded in that, you know, the reality and the real feelings. And that's, I think.
That's a great point, yeah.
I totally agree with what they said, but I don't ever see myself writing fantasy. I'm not really a huge fan of it, but I also just don't think I could do it well, so I'll stick with what I'm doing for now.
Oh, and I'll say I would if I came up with something really cool. But I agree, like, it's like kudos to fantasy people, because you're like building a whole world, you're making rules of that world. It's not easy stuff. I mean, that's like a whole different thing. And if I could think of something really cool, then I would be like glad to try it and see if I could do it. But I don't know, maybe I wouldn't be good at it. Who knows? You know?
You never know.
You never know. It's
Try,
just like picture books, I think, are one of the most difficult mediums to write in. And people think they're so easy. Oh, it's just a few sentences and some pictures. But no, actually, it's like poetry, where you have such a small space to tell a story or to convey something, that you really have to use that space wisely. And I tried doing a picture book in in grad school, and I was having such a hard time with it. And I thought, hey, maybe that's not like my talent, or maybe you know, it's not for me.
So it's whatever comes naturally to you.
I think so.
You know, you can't force something just because it's popular.
No, never. And you should never, ever, you know, try to write the next Twilight or the next, you know, you should never try, I don't think, personally, you should never try to be like the next great writer. You gotta write what's inside you. You gotta write your stuff, your stories, your vision, because that is what makes the next great writer, is that the next great writer is always going to be unique, is always going to have paid attention to his or her voice. You know, he or she, the next great writer will never be a copycat. You know, that's what makes writers great, is that they are brave enough to listen to their own voice and march to their own drummer, I think.
But also understanding that like every story is sort of like, you know, there's not so many stories in the world, but it's like taking your own take on it,
exactly.
Making it fresh, making it your own, instead of just saying, I'm going to write, you know, werewolves because werewolves are like hot right now.
Right.
Because one thing I think people don't always know is that when you you spend a lot of time with a thing. It's not like you just write it and then it's published. You're going to spend like a year writing it probably, and then it's going through the editing process. It's copy edited. Then you've got cover stuff, and then you're going on tour maybe, and you're like signing and you're reading from it. It's like you better love the story that you wrote, because you're going to be spending a whole lot of time with that one story, and then the story is like a lifetime too. It doesn't just go away after that first year. So
I also think that if you're passionate about a story or a subject matter or a character, that will make your story that much better. And when you read something, I think most people can tell, like, if the author was passionate about it. Sometimes you read things and you're thinking, I don't think the author's heart was really in this, you know what I mean? So I think if you're passionate about your story and your subject matter and you really, really love it, then that will definitely shine through.
Is it hard to give something up that you've spent so much time and energy and passion on I hear all of you talking about giving it over to your editor. Is that a difficult thing for you to do?
Not if you like your editor. If you like your editor, if you have a good relationship with your editor, then it can be nerve-wracking because you have to wait for, oh, well, this doesn't work. Because you never, at least for me, I've never sent anything in and then had my editor call and say, it's perfect. It's ready to go to press. Yeah, it doesn't work.
if mine said that, I wouldn't trust it. I'd be
Yeah.
like, no, let's look at chapter 2 again.
I know,
Maybe
yeah,
look back.
yeah. So, the editors are great
Helpful.
people, but, they're there to do a job, too. They're there to tighten your work and make it as best as it can be. So it's scary, but it's, most of them are pretty kind about it.
Yeah, and I think that the author-editor relationship is really special, and I really feel strongly about just hands-on editing. And so, in a way, it's exciting to me when I've worked so hard on a book, like I spent this past summer working on my next book, and then sent it to my editor in September, and now I'm waiting for notes, and I'm excited to get back that letter from her. It's probably going to be like 8 pages, single-spaced or something with notes, things I need to change and work on, but I'm excited about it because I know that it will make the book that much better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now to go back to the title of this panel, do you think there is a sort of renaissance going on in young adult literature? And if yes, what do you believe to be the main causes of the phenomenon? Also, do you feel that there is just more quantity of young adult literature out there today? Or do you think the quality has also improved over the past couple years or so?
I think, yes, there is a new sort of renaissance, new golden age going on right now. I think the main cause would probably be because it's actually selling in bookstores. Like right now, especially with the way the economy is, children's books are sort of faring best above other genres because of the fact that people might not have the money to want to like spend $20 on a book for themselves, but your kids still need to read. Your kids still, deserve like good stuff to read, and like they still need to go to school and do all that. So I think that's why it's getting more attention these days. I think that the sort of higher ups recognize that it's making money. It's people are like Harry Potter, Hunger Games, Twilight, stuff like that. And so those are big phenomena. It's not like a flash in the pan, or it's not just for kids either. I think adults can enjoy it too.
Mm-hmm.
And so as long as it's a good story, then adults will want to read it as well. I still love reading young adult, not just because I write it. So, wait, and the other question was is there more quantity
Than quality.
than quality? What do you guys think?
I think there's definitely a lot out there. I mean, if you go into any independent bookstore or any chain store, there's a big teen section. And then there's really, in my opinion, there's a little bit for everybody. There's the vampire books, there's the, dystopian stuff, there's, bikinis and, stuff like that, just very commercial reading. There's more literary, historical fiction, things like that. So I think that I think it might be a little bit of both. I think there is definitely more quantity, but I think the quality is pretty good. I think it's depending on the reader and what each individual reader wants. There's something out there for everybody.
I think YA has really exploded over the years. It's become definitely more forefront. And to pick up on what Jenny said, I think because a lot of YA now is such a crossover fiction. A lot of adults are reading young adult novels. And like Jenny, to echo what Jenny said, and Lisa, if it's a good story, who cares what the genre is? You know, people want to read good books, period. And just because it's in the teen section, you know, doesn't mean it's not a great read.
And I just love the fact that it's become sort of more like crossover now too. I mean, I love going on the subway and looking up and then seeing, I'll see every day, it's at least one person reading Twilight.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, and that's great because I think there is sort of a bit of an attitude towards children's and young adult fiction where it's kind of like, oh, those are just for kids, those are kids' books, and they're not, you know, on the same level as stuff for adults. And I think now there's more of an awareness that, you know, people are writing good stuff. And just because it's being shelved in young adult doesn't mean that it's not a good story. Just same as with To Kill a Mockingbird or Catcher in the Rye. Maybe that stuff would have been shelved somewhere else today, and less people would have looked at it. You know, but that's just sort of geography too.
Yes.
Do you guys find that it's, yeah, I think each one of you, you wrote, your characters were 14 in Patron Saint of Butterflies, and then you guys had 12-year-olds. Lisa, was your character 12? 12, yeah. Do you think that it's easier or more difficult to write younger teens than older teens?
I like my new book that's coming out is called The Sweetness of Salt, and that's about a girl who's just graduated from high school. So she's 18, and I mean, obviously, as you're older, there's more issues that can come into play. Sex, obviously, drugs, alcohol, things like that. If that's part of the story, so I would say that writing younger would be a little bit easier because you don't have those issues, but then, you know, writing older can also be, it can make it more of a crossover book too, so you can really do anything with it. You're not as limited, you know, another middle grade book that I just finished, I was talking with my editor about this for a long time, and I was gonna have the girl who's 13, I was gonna have her be approached on the street by a drug dealer. And she wasn't going to take them or anything, but she was going to be approached. It's an inner city situation. And my editor said, you know, for the tween, we just cannot, you can maybe talk, it's called happening off screen, where you can talk about something that's happened, but you can't actually show it on the page. You can't have the scene be a drug dealer walks up to this girl and says, do you want something for $10? Because of the age, you know? So writing younger, it keeps things more restricted, whereas as you get older, everything is sort of no holds barred. So I think each has its own merits and complications. But do you find writing younger harder, or?
I would agree with you and say I find writing younger easier.
Yeah.
For the same reasons, in that the older, like the book I'm working on, Summer I Turned Pretty, is the first of a trilogy. So the next book, she's a year older. It's called It's Not Summer Without You. And the third book, I think there's going to be a bigger jump in time. And I struggle a little bit with what is going to happen in the books to come, too, because you want to be realistic. You want to be faithful and true to the story you're writing and to the characters you're writing. So they make decisions that you don't necessarily agree with or you wouldn't make for yourself, but you want to feel like you are being true to them. So it's like kind of weighing that stuff out and feeling like it just makes it a little harder. I think the problems are bigger and the world gets bigger the older you are. The characters are too.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure I have an opinion on this, to be honest. So that's my answer.
Well, you write 12 very well.
I feel very strongly about the middle school years. So.
All right. Well, right now we're going to take a little break and collect any questions that the audience has written down as cards. Lenny and Camille are going to come by and collect questions from the audience, and we will ask those. Okay.
Sarah, Sophia's sick. She's sick. Which one is that? Hot? She's fevering. Well, who knows? Yeah, she's not feeling well.
They do look red.
Did they? Yeah. I don't think she feels well.
Okay, we have two questions. One question is for some budding writers out there, wondering how did you find an editor or agent?
Okay. I'll start. I found an agent first. You don't get an editor, or at least I didn't, until I got the agent part down. And the agent, how I found my agent was I went to the library and I got a book called The Literary Marketplace. And it lists all the agents and all of their information, like what kind of work they represent and what their requirements and everything. And I picked out 40 agents in New York City, and 40 that I thought would be a good fit with what I was writing. And I didn't, like I said before, I didn't know that Patron Saint of Butterflies was going to be marketed as young adult. So I just looked for fiction agents. I didn't look for a young adult agent. And what I did was you have to write a really, really good killer query letter. And a query letter is basically your way of selling yourself and what you have, your wares. And you say, my name is Cecilia Galante. I've written a 320-page or whatever manuscript. It's ready to be seen. It's about this and this. If you're interested, please call me or write me. And make sure you include all of your contact information. So I sent that out to 40 agents, just cold. And I got about 36 no's. And I got four that said, yeah, let's see what you have. Send us the first 3 chapters. And out of those 4, I got 2 offers for representation. So, I got 38 no's, but you guys, all it takes is 1 yes, right? So all of a sudden here I was saddled with the position of having to choose between 2 agents. I'm like, oh my God, two people want to represent me. So I went with the agent who told me that she didn't want to just represent this book. I had written that she wanted to represent me throughout my entire literary career. She's like, I want to be with you from now till 40 years, till you're done writing. I want to be with you in the long haul. And I was like, yeah, this is the one I want. So, and I'm still with her. It's the best decision I've ever made. I've been with her now for almost 5 years, and she's great. And she was the one who got me hooked up with editors at the publishing houses where your book gets sent. And that's how it worked for me.
Mine was my story is sort of storybook, I guess, in that I was in a fiction workshop at the MFA program Lisa and I did, and my teacher, I submitted for the first time, and she called me up and was like, do you have an agent? You need to finish this right away. You can submit to my agent. And I was like, cool, yeah, great. So that was easy, and I knew that I knew of her agent, and she represented people that I respect and whose work I like Katie Camillo, who does middle grade, and so I submitted to them, and then they said yes, and from then we sort of made a list together of publishing houses and editors that we were going to submit to. A couple of them I knew of, most I didn't. I just did a little research afterwards, figuring out what kind of stuff they edit, what their tastes are, what the publishing house is like, and then we submitted, and then we had quite a few say yes. So then we had an auction, and that was cool. So they were sort of making offers, and then we ended up going with where I am now, which is Simon & Schuster, and I'm really happy with them.
Well, my process is a little bit similar to Cecilia's, except that I sort of had an agent breakup in the middle. I had one agent, it just didn't work out very well, so we sort of parted ways. But then I found another agent who's wonderful. Her name is Alyssa, and she, I wouldn't have a career without her, really. She reads everything I write, and she's just so supportive. So basically, she was my second agent, and then, she shopped the book around and, found a home for me at Abrams. But I do think that it's really important for people to have an agent because your agent is sort of, on your team with you, your advocate, will root for you all the way, give you solid advice, will care about your career. Like Cecilia said, be with you for the long haul. So a lot of authors don't have agents, but I strongly believe in it.
Yeah, that's a big question that comes up. Do you need an agent to publish a book? And the answer is no. You don't need one to publish a book. You can get a book published on your own. If your story is good enough and strong enough, somebody eventually will take it. It will not, however, be one of the bigger houses. The bigger houses, like Little Brown that Jenny's publishing with, Simon & Schuster, who's both of our publishers, they don't accept unagented material. And that's not because they're being snobby. It's just because they literally do not have the resources to read all of those manuscripts. Everybody wants to be published by Random House or one of the big guys, right, or Penguin or whatever. So, and if they allowed everybody to just send them stuff, they would get millions of manuscripts every year. So they only allow agented submissions, which means that an agent sends them in. So if you want to get published by one of the bigger houses, then you do need an agent. And I recommend, aside from the big house, it doesn't matter if you get published by a big house or not, but I recommend getting an agent because there's so much about the publishing industry that you might not know after you get taken in. Like
Contracts.
Foreign rights, yeah, all of that stuff. I have no clue what any of that is about. And she takes care of all of that for me, and I don't have to worry about it. She sends me something, I sign it, and she explains it to me, and that's that, If you don't have an agent, you'll have to figure out how to navigate your way through that on your own. So
You also wouldn't be able to generate interest from more than one house on your own.
Right.
It's not done. It's like, but the agent could. So also, a lot of people think of it like a marriage, you and the agent, where you're kind of agreeing to be together, for as long as it's going to work out, and that they have your best interest at heart, and that they will fight for you along the way. Sometimes little things come up at the publishing house where you're not happy with something, and then you have the agent to kind of come in and say, hey, Jenny's not happy, she's really upset, and I don't have to do that. So it kind of keeps your relationship clean with your editor, so you don't have to talk about money, you don't have to talk about the stuff that kind of makes it like a little bit,
yeah. The
Not
best
so
agent
fun.
will be your strongest advocate. At a cocktail party, she'll, name drop. She'll be, talking you up. You can't be everywhere. And agents, most agents are in New York City. They're young. Most of them are women. They go out. They do things like this, And, if you're on the tip of their tongue and they're talking about you, that's good. That's a great thing, That's how word gets out. And that's what that's another thing they can do, too.
Very helpful. That's interesting that you said most of them are young women, because this next question kind of speaks to that in terms of young adult literature. This question reads, A Walk Through Borders suggests young adult is predominantly a genre for girls. Why is this or is this not the case? And what is out there for boys?
I think more girls read. It's just a fact. Publishers do they look for boys stuff a lot. That's like a target of theirs, to find stuff for boys. But it has to be like pitched just the right way for the boys to pick it up. And if it has a girl on the cover, the boy's not going to pick it up. Girls tend to read both more. They'll be more willing to read something with a guy on the cover. I think the more universal genre would be fantasy. I think boys definitely read a lot of fantasy, a lot of more of the action stuff, like the James Patterson, Alex Rider, that kind of stuff. But I think that's just a fact. Working in the library, I can see it myself, that we have a lot less boy readers, and they kind of drop off around 6th grade, whereas the girls are more constant, at least through 8th grade. And they just aren't as into it, and I wish they would be, and I think it is important to have stuff for them that they're willing to.
Yeah, there's a great teen book for boys by Laurie Halls Anderson called Twisted, and it's narrated by a boy, and it's great. It's so well done. And so that would be something that if any of you are out there looking for a male narrator, she's a brilliant young adult writer. Brilliant, one of my real. I hate to use the word hero, but she's somebody that I just love her writing style and her stories and everything. They're great. She's an excellent YA writer. So Twisted is the book that she's done.
Yeah, she wrote Speak.
Speak is her big one, yeah.
Excellent. No comment. Okay, well, let's go to the next question. Do you all have any ideas of how to market young adult literature to adults? This question is coming from a librarian who would love to hear suggestions for that.
Market YA towards adults?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of maybe like those, if you like blah, 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 you'll like this. I think
Oh, yeah,
that can be good.
that's
you know,
great, yeah.
Similar, like adult stuff that's similar to YA stuff that could kind of
Yeah.
cross over like that.
Yeah.
It's like unfortunate because so much of it has to do with the covers of stuff too. I think,
Yeah.
you know, and sometimes they'll come out with double covers to accommodate that, but most times not as much.
Mm-hmm.
Or paperback. Paperback is always a different cover. So that helps too. That's a great idea though. If you start by saying, if you liked this adult novel, you might enjoy this one, and then put the teen one out, you know? Something that has similar issues
Like
or...
a battle royale. If you like battle royale, maybe you'll like Hunger Games, or if you like
Yeah.
the True Blood, Sookie Stackhouse books, maybe you'll like Twilight or
Yeah.
something else.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. And again, it's, a word of mouth thing, definitely from a librarian. If a librarian says, this is a great story, it's actually for young adults, but it has these strong adult characters. It's just a matter of saying, this is a great story, I think you'll like it, kind of thing. And then as word spreads.
Yeah, you also, doesn't you also have an award for adult novels that are popular with
Yes,
young adults? So
yes.
maybe there could be a switcheroo
Yeah.
and have
That's true.
young adult novels that are popular with adults,
That's a great idea.
maybe. Okay, one more question. Okay. This audience member is interested in the idea of age appropriateness in YA fiction. I think going on what Cecilia was saying earlier and how it's difficult to write for older voices. If you can't talk about drugs, for example, can kids really believe that being approached by a drug dealer ever happens? Do they believe in fiction where it doesn't? Audience member, is there something a little more clear?
No, I think I understand the
Okay,
question.
you get it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I have to say that when my editor told me that I had to take the drug detail out of that book, I was so disappointed. I teach at a low-income public high school, and I teach 10th grade now, but I started out teaching 7th grade, where kids are 12 and 13 years old. And I said to her, my students are having to get approached by somebody offering them drugs is happening in the hallway, not just out in the street. And I have kids who have stories about drugs and, 12-year-old kids about drugs and sex and things that are going on in their home lives that you would not believe. And she said, I know, but for the publishing world, and I'm not saying that you can't have this happen, but we're going to have to bump up the age. It's just the way it goes. You cannot have a 12-year-old being approached by a drug dealer in this book. And, maybe that'll change somewhere down the line, because you can't tell me it's not happening in real life. It happens every single day, and worse. These kids aren't just being approached by drug dealers. They're taking the drugs and then selling them again in school. Or they're taking them themselves and coming to school high. Is that me? No. Okay, that's somebody upstairs.
Upstairs.
Do you know what I mean? So, and these are things that are going on in my school, my public high school, and I can't write about that because they're 12, and apparently that's the case. I have to make the kid 14 or 15, bump it up to teen. So what I had to do was take out the drug issue in that story and make it something else. And it didn't ultimately change the story too drastically, fortunately. Hopefully it has the same impact without the drugs in it. But I was disappointed. I really was. And, like I said, maybe someday that will change, because it is reality. It's the way things go. What about you guys?
Well, even, the book Bridge to Terabithia, which is a classic, and I think probably the best, one of the best books ever dealing with, death. People protested and banned it because they thought it was inappropriate for kids because unfortunately, one of the characters died in it. But ultimately, it's a tragedy, but it happened. So it's one of these dilemmas that people face because they want to write an accurate portrayal of the character and life and society, but then at the same time, and I think we all feel this way, we sort of want to shelter kids and say everything's going to be okay. And, especially in today's world of, war and the economic downturn and, everything else, there's also, a feeling of like, let's just, help kids to feel like everything's going to be okay. So I don't really have an answer for it, but I feel like this has been going on. I mean, I think Bridge to Terabithia was published in like the mid-'70s. So it's been going on forever and ever.
Yeah.
There are a million more examples of that. So
I agree, both of you guys. It's kind of like the whole idea of adults wishing it were a certain way, and not so much about how it really is. So the reality versus, we wish kids didn't have to deal with that, but kids do have to deal with death and divorce, and sex, all kinds of stuff. And I think, to me, with my personal opinion, it's like if it's something, for instance, one thing that's never sort of broached within children's books, I don't think, is sort of child sexuality, and not just teenagers, but kids and sexuality, and how that, and the truth about that, and how that really is. And I think because there aren't books about it, it almost makes kids feel ashamed and that it doesn't really exist. And to me, that's wrong. And one book that I was working on, that I mentioned earlier, Promise You Won't Tell, has elements of that in it. And my publisher was kind of like, you know what, this is really dark, and we don't know if it's the right time for this, or we will, but they weren't really super excited about it. So I said, I'll hold off on it, but it's something I do want to do. And I just think we do kids an injustice and a disservice by not having that stuff available to them. So my personal wish is that we could, and that, it's not just, we can't just blame the publishers, because it's like libraries, it's like adults, people get upset by stuff that they think is like harmful to kids, and they don't want to buy it.
Well, that's why Judy Blume was such a big deal, because she was the first writer to ever talk about, a girl getting her period. I mean, that was so taboo, and there's a whole book, Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret, that's about this girl getting her period, and you can't tell me, there's not a woman in this room that hasn't at least heard of that book if you haven't read it, and felt, oh, okay, it's not the end of the world. I mean, I grew up in a situation where when that happened to me, I didn't know anything about it. My mother didn't talk to me about it, and so I thought I was dying. I really did. I thought I was sick. I didn't know it was wrong. And, just so to have books like that are available to kids where they can, if that's the only way they're going to learn about their bodies is through a book, then why not, and it's done very well. It's not lewd or...
I don't know how that would be lewd. I mean, it's like a
tawdry, yeah.
physical
Exactly.
thing. But, I mean, for Shug, my first book, she does get her period. I mean, it takes place when she's in 7th grade. It's a full year. So, it happens, and some people had a problem with it. They were like, it shouldn't be there.
In 7th grade?
Well, because one thing that happened was, I don't know if you guys have heard of like Scholastic book clubs. They will take books a lot of times, and her book actually got picked up by them, and they'll make it into a paperback, and they'll have it for book clubs across the country in schools. And their kids can buy it for cheaper as a paperback, and they were interested in Shug, but they wanted to take out like the period thing. I'm like, you can't take that out. That's just a part of the story. And to me, I was like, no, I'd rather not, have it available that way if it's going to be taken out. And they were like, take out the word but. I'm like, what?
Going along with that point, My Life in Pink and Green did get picked up by Scholastic, and I got an email the other day from a very lovely woman who said, I loved your book, but unfortunately we cannot have it because you use the word God. Like the character will say, oh my God, or something. And, I agree with that. Like, I think, we probably shouldn't take the Lord's name in vain or anything. But at the same time, it's a colloquialism that a 12-year-old would probably say. And I had to respect her wishes. It, was a religious school and everything, and that's totally fine. But you realize with every little thing that you do, people are going to, put their own spin on it, and it's going to affect them differently. And you can't please everybody, and you have to be true to your character and true to your story. But these are all sort of complications that come up when you're writing.
Yeah, and I mean, this is 2009. We're almost at 2010, and there are still tons of books out there that are banned in America. It's Banned Books Week, this week, right?
Yeah.
Banned in America for whatever reason. It's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah. So the bottom line, write what you want to write and see what happens.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you guys to kind of give any last words of encouragement to people who are interested in writing young adult fiction, and also encouragement to people who may have never picked up a young adult novel. Why should they do it? And that will conclude today's session.
Well, I guess the last thing I would want to say is for if anybody out there is an aspiring writer, I would just say whatever rejection you get, and you'll get them. It took me almost 12 years to get my book published, my first book published, and now I have 5 books out, more to come, and the point of that to say is just to never, never give up. Just keep, if this is what you want, do it until it happens, because you'll get there. It may take you 5, 6, 12 years like it did me. But if it's what you want and you know it's what you want, then do what it takes to get there. Do the work, put the time in, and just keep plugging away. Don't take no for an answer. I didn't.
I guess I would say if you want to write, you should do it, and do it for the joy of it. Because I think if you just have that goal of, I just want to get published, it's never going to be enough. It's always going to be something else. People, after you get published, it's like, I just want to be on the front table at Barnes & Noble. I just want to be on the New York Times bestseller list. And it's like one after one. And I think it takes away from just the pleasure of doing a thing, when it becomes, when
The end all be
the end all be all. Exactly. When you're just so focused on that, because I think most of us write because we love it and that's what we want to do. And I think I do have some friends who are still trying to get published, trying to find representation, and I think they want it so bad, and I want it for them. But it comes to a point too where once you get that, it's always going to be something else too. So
yeah, and to add on to that, that's such a brilliant point. To add on to that, I have this quote I keep above my desk that says, if you're not enough before the gold medal, you're not going to be enough after it. And it's really, really true. If publication is the gold medal, if you're not okay with yourself and writing and everything before it's getting published, even though it might seem like it'll change everything, it won't. You have to do it for the love of the craft. You have to do it because you write, and you can't not write.
I totally agree, and I also think, going back to what I said before, I feel like if you write what you're passionate about and what you care about,